Hello everybody, welcome to the long-awaited C10 Boss Mule funding guide. In this video, you're going to learn how to make a C10 Boss Mule if you don't know what a C10 Boss Mule is. For example, the legendary famous Pooper Dog 111 is a C10 Boss Mule. So what that means is you clear bosses that are in the Tenebris region at their max difficulty and below. So hard Dark Now, hard Vihilla, hard Gloom, hard Will, hard Lucid, Chaos Slime, hard Lotus and Damien, and below. So the reason why this is so useful is you make a lot of money every single week doing this. You would be making around 5.2, 5 to 5.5 billion mesos a week just from one character doing its bosses. For those who have no idea what's going on, boss crystals recently got buffed. Like, the prices have increased on the harder bosses, so it makes stuff like a C10 boss mule doing like hard Dark Now, hard Vihilla a little bit more worth to do. So I'm making this funding guide to show you guys exactly how you do it. Now, this is super important, so please do not skip ahead in the video. Do not just skip to like pictures of what gear you need to get. This is super important. The beginning part of this video is like mandatory to watch because this is not the same as a normal Lotus and Damien mule, right? Where you could just put a bunch of nodes on it, get it to like 4 mil CP, and you're good to go, and you could just make your like 1.3 billion a week. This is a much higher funding point in the game. In fact, most people who play this game, their mains haven't even gotten to this point. So I'm talking about making mules that are stronger than the average person's main. So if you're a brand new player watching this video, maybe save it for when you're a lot deeper in the game, because this is not something that you should do as a new player. This is not something that you should do even as a mid-game player. This is like a late game to end game type thing that you would want to put your mesos in. And not only that, you would want to put your mesos into this in a very smart way, and I'm going to teach you how to do all of that, because when things get really expensive on this game, I'm talking 100 billion plus mesos of funding, it's super important to be very calculated with that funding, and you don't want to just waste it on random bullshit, because 5% savings here, 10% savings there, when we're talking in the terms of hundreds of billions, that's a lot of mesos saved. Not only do you get a lot of mesos from having a C10 boss mule, you get a ton of MVPs. I'm talking like 30 to 50 MVPs or even more depending on how many mules you have per week just from doing these mules. So it also helps your main in terms of training a lot, because you just get so many MVPs, which makes your training a lot faster. Now, if you're wondering, Pooper Dog is at 64.5 mil CP, and I'm able to do all of these bosses in a fair amount of time. But by the end of this funding guide, you're going to be even stronger than Pooper Dog for your C10 boss mule, because I feel like this isn't like the ultimate version of a C10 boss mule. Like, there's still some room to grow on Pooper Dog pretty easily, mostly being Liberation being the big one that would really push it over the edge and make it like this is a complete C10 boss mule. But in terms of Pooper Dog's gear, like, it's actually really good. So just to give you like a little bit of a teaser on what type of gear we're looking to get on a C10 boss mule, it would be something like this, where you have 20-star superior gear, you have 21-star Meister, maybe a 21 or 22 KT, you have some sort of Oz ring that you got over the weeks of running bosses, or maybe a 17-star slime ring. You could have a Dom pendant because you're doing Arcarium daily. You have the arcane set. Even if you don't have the arcane set, you could have 21-star or 22-star or 20-star Abso. We'll talk about that all when we get into details. 21 or 22 CRA. You could have either Sweetwater accessories. Again, we'll talk about that later, but I happen to get lucky on a Berserk. And the pots are generally 2-line or 3 usable lines on the WSC. But there's much more that goes into this than just gear. Like, Arcane Force is a huge deal that you need on your mules. You need Hexa skills as well. There's a lot that goes into it, so let's get right into it. So welcome to the C10 Boss Mule funding guide. After that introduction, let's talk about the context and prerequisites to even wanting to make a C10 Boss Mule. Again, this is very important. Do not skip over this part of the video. This is probably the most important part of the video, and you need to understand this before you jump into doing something like this. Now, before we talk about that, I just want to say that at the end of the day, I want to fully acknowledge this. At the end of the day, you can play this game however you want. If you want to do this and you're a new player, of course, do whatever you want, whatever makes you happy. But these recommendations are from somebody who has been playing this game for a long time. I've made so many funding guides and boss wheel funding guides, and I've helped probably thousands of people at this point, and I'm blessed to be able to do so. And I would advise you to listen to what I'm saying, because I'm trying to help you guys out and save you guys money and make the game a little bit easier for you. And of course, if this video helps you out, make sure to subscribe, pull up to the Twitch channel. So first, let's talk about the recommended requirements that I would say to make a C10 boss meal. So if you don't have any of these things, I wholeheartedly do not recommend you to make a C10 boss meal. Stick to funding your main, stick to developing your account, work on the foundation of your account more, maybe work on babier boss mules, but not a C10 boss meal. So the first thing is you want at least 8,000 Legion or higher. The reason why you want at least 8,000 Legion or higher is because Legion gives you so much damage and it helps you save a lot of money, because you don't have to invest in like things like IED, WSE, or a massive amount of buff duration that you need for like an explorer mage if you're playing something like that. So it just opens the door way wider for you. So it's super important to have at least 8,000 Legion when you are trying to fund this. The next thing is you want to know the boss mechanics. Now, the reason why this is so important is because the difference from somebody who knows the boss mechanics and knows them like so-so, or maybe doesn't know them, is huge. Like, that is a massive difference in damage output if you know how the bosses work versus you don't. So what that means is you probably have played this game before. You probably have a main that has cleared these bosses in the past, and it'll be so much easier to clear them on mules because you already know what's going on in the bosses. You don't want to make a C10 boss meal, and it's actually your first time doing C10 on a boss meal, because it's just going to be so much harder. Your damage uptime will be super low, and you won't be able to actually do that much damage, even if you're strong enough to clear it. So it's super important to know the boss mechanics. I have a lot of boss guides on my YouTube channel as well. You could search like Darknell Duky boss guide and like it'll show up. So there's that. Same with Vihila. Now, the next one, some of you might not like to hear this, but it's just the truth. It's just the truth. I think things will be so much easier for you if you have at least a level 280 plus main on your account that has max drop gear. Now, max drop gear means you have 200 drop on your equips. Maybe you have a large drop fam or a medium drop fam, max holy symbol, you have WAPs, wealth acquisition potions, and you're able to farm a lot. The reason why you want at least a level 280 plus main is because the resources that you need to make a C10 boss meal come from your main. You need a lot of nodes for the boss meal, so you need to get them from your main. You need a lot of mesos. How are you going to get them? You're going to farm it on your main. You need a lot of primals and stuff. How are you going to get them? You get them from bossing on your main. Threads of fate materials so that you can craft Meister on your mules, all that stuff. You get all of these things on your main, and I've personally found that in these days, when somebody is around level 280 or higher, they probably are able to get these materials a lot easier. So I would highly recommend, if you don't have your main at level 280 or higher and you don't have max drop gear, probably focus on your main a little bit more. Now, some people would even say you'd want your main at 285 plus. Now, I thought that was a little too much, but I definitely understand that sentiment. Now, of course, these are recommended requirements, right? Like, it's not mandatory, like you have to have your main at level 280. It's just a recommendation, because I've personally found with all the people that I've talked to that usually when people get to this point, they're able to actually get the resources to fund other characters pretty effectively. Max nodes. So you're going to want to max your nodes out on your boss meal. When I say max nodes, I don't mean max decent combat orders or sharp eyes or bind necessarily or anything like that. I mean max your important skill nodes. So for example, on Night Lord, throwing star barrage, throw blasting, shuriken, shadow walker, my boost nodes, these are like the most important skills for Night Lord, so you have those maxed out. Now, I don't even have 100% max nodes on this character. Like, I should max Dark Lord's Omen, I should max Last Resort, it's one level off. That's what max nodes means. Goddess, those are max nodes. You don't need a max like Will of Urda or Blink or Decent Advanced Blessing, none of those things. Obviously, the reason why you want max nodes is not only to unlock your Hexa skills, but it just gives you a stupid amount of damage without costing any meso. So you definitely want to have max nodes, which goes back to having the main with max drop gear, because you'll be able to farm a lot of nodes. Now, this one is super important. The ability to do dailies on multiple characters. Now, what do I mean by doing dailies on multiple characters? At the end of the day, if you're doing something as deep as C10, you're going to need max Arcane Force. You're going to need Golux gear. You're gonna need to kill Pink Bean every day to stack a bunch of belts and Black Bean marks. You're gonna need to kill Arcarium every day to get a bunch of Dom pendants over the months. This entire process takes months. You can't just like create a C10 boss mule and then next week you're done, like the same way you do with a normal Lomian boss mule. The process takes months and months, and you have to be diligent. You have to do your dailies every day. You're going to ideally want the superior set for Golux. You could do reinforced set, but I really would recommend the superior set. But that takes months. It takes months to get. So you have to be able to do dailies every day and be diligent. If you're not strong enough to do the dailies, maybe trade with somebody. That's why you have a main that has max drop gear, so you can carry somebody and they could carry you on their main, and you could trade dailies. Like if you can't do Helix, maybe you could 5% it and you could trade dailies every day with somebody. So it's very important. Also, dailies take a long time, right? Like it's added time to your day. You're already doing dailies on your main. You're already bossing on your main. And now you have to do more dailies on your mule if you want to make it as a C10 boss mule. I'm trying to be as honest as possible with you guys. Like these are things that might get glanced over in the process of making a C10 boss mule, but it's the truth. Like nobody really talks about how long dailies take. But yes, you have to be able to do dailies on multiple characters, and I want to make that very, very clear. You have to also have the ability to save mesos. Now, this sounds dumb, right? Like, oh, obviously you have to save mesos, but you would not believe how many people just spend their money all willy-nilly on random garbage, right? So you need to be able to save your mesos. The reason why that's so important is because of events. So again, like I mentioned earlier, when we're talking about spending dozens of billions or hundreds of billions of mesos, saving 20% of it on an event, or even saving 10% of it, is a lot of money. So you need to be able to save your mesos. You do not want to make these boss mules off event. You always want to do it on event. So you need to be able to save a lot of mesos and not get the itch in spending it, which is hard. It's really hard. I get that itch too, so don't worry, I get it. Now the next one is ability to trade carries or join public parties. The reason why this is so important, again, it goes back to having a strong main so you could trade carries, is because a lot of the drops that you need for C10 boss mules come from weeklies, right? Like you're going to want to get arcanes eventually. How are you going to get arcanes? You're going to want to trade carries or join public parties to actually run those bosses and get arcanes to drop. You're going to want to be able to do hard Lomian to get Absos to drop. You're going to want to do Helix even as early as that to get that to drop. You want to be able to run bosses on your mules even if they're not fully funded yet, and it's a lot easier to do that if you have a main that is able to carry people, because you could just get carried back. If you don't have that, then you could just join public parties and try to struggle run to clear some stuff. That's what I did on my FP, and that's what I did on my Nightlers. I just joined public parties and eventually I got the gear I needed. And this is the most important one, is you need to have patience. Now the reason why patience is so important is because the process is going to be frustrating. It is, like, there's no easy way of just getting a fully funded C10 boss mule. It's going to be frustrating. You're probably going to wipe in Darkanel. You might wipe in Vihila or something along the way. You might wipe in a public party. You might have scheduling issues if you are trying to trade carries. It's going to be annoying, and you need to have patience. And also the entire process takes months. Like just maxing Arcane Force alone takes at least 3 months. So you need to set yourself in a mindset of acknowledging that, like, this is a long process. It's not something that I could just do within a week or two. So you need to have patience and get used to it. You might even be doing long runs. Like let's say you're trying to clear Gloom and it takes like 20 minutes, but you manage to solo it. That's still worth it. Even if it takes 20 minutes, it's still worth it. And you get the solo loot, solo meso, all that stuff. So you definitely need patience. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is the timeline. So how long does all of this take to make a fully fledged C10 boss mule? So I listed some stuff that's very, very important that we need to talk about. So first of all, the entire process takes usually a bare minimum of 3 months to make a C10 boss mule. The reason why it takes a bare minimum of C10 boss mule is over here, I set this calculator to have a level 1 Aspera symbol, which is the last symbol you get in Arcane River. And how long would it take if you did the daily and the weekly every single day and week? It would take 101 days to max the symbol. So obviously if you're like hyper burned or something, you would get your symbol at level 7 and it would take less time than that. But if you're not, then it would take about 3 months at least to max your Arcane Force. Now, obviously this could be faster with like event resources and other stuff like that. And you know, the weekly is going to be increased to 120 symbols like in June or July of next year. But yeah, it's usually going to take like at least 3 months to get your max symbols. You need max symbols. It gives you a stupid amount of damage against the C10 bosses, so it's very important to get. you're going to want to be at least level 260. Now, the reason why this is important is because obviously you get your 6th job. You're going to have your origin skill and maybe your masteries and stuff like that. So that gives you a huge amount of damage. Also, level 260 gives you damage bonus on Gloom and Vihilla. So it makes them even easier. Now, the reason why I put 265 to 270 is better is because of Darknell. Darknell himself is a level 265 boss. So even at 260, you aren't doing full damage to him. So if you're able to grind to 265 or even to 270 on your C10E boss mule, then you would be way stronger, because also in that process, you'll get a lot of fragments, which will make your Hexa stronger and you'll just be doing way more damage. But in reality, though, you don't necessarily need to get 265. Like, I've done my boss mules at level 260, level 262 with Transcendent Potions. You could just do that. You could leech Monster Park Extreme every day. Like, my Lara hit 262 just from doing MPE every day for like a month, and now I'm like 262. So just those 2 levels gives you a lot of damage on Dark now. But yeah, the whole point is, like, if you could level past 260, then that would be ideal, but you could still do the bosses even at 260. Now, ideally wait for event and hyperburn. The reason why this is so important is because it just makes things so much easier. Like I keep mentioning before, when you were talking about spending dozens of billions or hundreds of billions, saving 10% on an event or even 20% on an event is a massive amount of savings. So you want to wait for events to do this ideally. And then also there's hyperburn. Hyperburn just makes it so much easier because you get super high level symbols. You could get the item burning gear that makes it so that you could just start running bosses in public parties and get gear way faster. You get to 260 pretty much immediately, so you could just work on your dailies and order requests and all that stuff way faster. So if you could wait for hyperburn, that's the most ideal way to do it. But obviously hyperburn is only like 2 times a year, so I get it. It's would take a long time to always wait for hyperburn. If you just want to make like an army of C10E boss mules as quickly as possible, you wouldn't want to wait for hyperburn, but that's the way I would recommend to do it. And then liberation. So liberating your Genesis weapon will give you a massive amount of damage, like over 20% final damage just from doing that. And the liberation process is getting easier in the future. So this is a huge deal, and I would highly recommend liberating your C10E boss mules. It'll make things so much easier. Not only do you get the Genesis iframe so that your damage output is more guaranteed, you just get a super strong weapon that will make you do like way more damage. So for example, my Night Lord is able to do Vihilla in like 15 to 20 minutes, right? Hard Vihilla. If I were to be liberated, it would be way shorter than that. I'd be able to do it in like 12 to 15 minutes. So I'd be saving so much time just because I'm liberated. Now that might not seem like a big deal for a lot of you guys, like, oh, 12 to 15 minute Vihilla, like that still feels like a long time. I'd want it to be faster. Like I want to like 2-burst it or something like that. The thing is though, if you're funding a character to that point where you're like 1 to 2 bursting Vihilla, you're not even like a C10E boss mule anymore, to be honest. You're just strong as hell. Like the funding requirement to get to that point is so much further out and so much stronger that like you wouldn't even necessarily want a guide. Like you would just be funding to like full 22 essentially. So yeah, that's not really what I'm talking about. This guide is more for like doing all of the C10E boss mules, and everything combined would probably take about an hour. So you spend like about an hour to make like 5 to 5.5 billion mesos, which I think is like insane meso per minute. Now let's talk about some of the dailies that you should be doing just to keep it perfectly clear in this guide on your C10E boss mule. So obviously you want to do your Arcane River dailies and weeklies if you can every single day. The faster you max your Arcane Force, the more damage you get, not only because the Arcane Force gives you a bunch of stat, it also allows you to get bonus damage based off of the boss's Arcane Force requirements. You want to do Arcarium every day to stack as many Dominator pendants as possible. These are super important because it's a really strong secondary pendant, and you can use them to transfer to Superior Pendant. Pink Bean, you do it every day so you could get Black Bean marks and a bunch of belts that you could transfer to the Superior Golux belt once you get it. Golux itself, which is super important, you want to do it every day because getting the Superior set takes a bare minimum of 2 months just for the coins, not even necessarily for the drops themselves. It could take longer for the drops. And now Commercy, Monster Park, and Urdo Quest, I put a little star onto them because you don't technically have to do them, but they could be useful in certain situations. So for example, Commercy could be useful because you can get a monocle, which is a pretty significant gain over the Black Bean mark. You could also get a tattoo, which is a really significant gain over the Zac face, or Twilight mark if you don't have a lot of Twilight mark spares, but eventually you would get a bunch of Twilight marks anyways. Commercy is not as bad as people think. Like, it is useful if you're somebody who doesn't mind doing dailies. But if you hate dailies, then it's miserable to do. Even the Sweetwater pendant could be useful if you don't have a lot of Dominator pendants. Like, if you just want to use the Dominator pendants to transfer to Superior Golux, that's fine. And then you could just use a Commercy pendant, get it to like 21 stars or something just as a secondary pendant. You could do that. I did Commercy on my Lara for like 2 months or something, and I got like a few thousand dinaros, and it came in handy, to be honest with you, because I got no Twilight marks to drop in that entire time, but I was able to get a tattoo to give me a lot of damage. Monster Bark is super useful because it gives you a lot of XP. So while you're training this character up to whatever level you want, doing Monster Bark will help dramatically just because it gives you so much XP. And then Urda Request. So the Urda Request is really useful because you can get frags on your boss mule. You can unlock your masteries, get some hexa levels up, and it'll make you a lot stronger. But you don't necessarily have to do it if you just want to train on it, or if you buy the Urda booster or something like that, or you want to get the frags only on your main. But these things are all very useful to do, and I would highly recommend doing them on your C10E boss mule. With that all being said though, I wouldn't necessarily even recommend working on multiple C10E boss mules at once either, because doing dailies on this many characters every day can be exhausting. Like, I do dailies on like 6 characters a day, like most of these dailies on 6 characters a day, and like, man, it takes so long. But I'm somebody who, like, I'm able to do that, so I totally get if doing it on multiple characters is just too much. But if you decide to work on a C10E boss mule, I would definitely say do these dailies. All right, so this is also very, very important. To make a C10E boss mule, you're going to have to go through multiple different stages of gear. It's very similar to regular gear progression on a main, but obviously you don't get fully maxed out gear like you would as a main. So this is the first step that I would want to work on for funding a C10E boss mule, getting anywhere between like 8 to 14 mil CP. These are just like a ballpark range. But the whole point is you're able to do your dailies, you're able to run H-Lomian, either traded in a carry and blue dot or pug it. Same with hard looser and hard will. Either you can trade and blue dot and get loot, or you could run it in a party. And then you're also able to run C10E. Now, believe it or not, I have a hero at around 13 mil CP, and I have my shade, which is item burned, around 14 mil CP, and I'm able to leech C10E bosses and trade these runs with people because I understand how to play the class, and I did my daily, so I have the arcane force to do the bosses, and I'm able to survive for like, 10 minutes in a run, so I could actually blue dot. But that's why I put if experience, because a lot of people, even at this CP, you might not actually able to do it if you don't know how to do it, but you will be able to do it. Now, the whole point of getting to this point is so that you can start accumulating resources as early as possible, because a lot of the process of making a C10E boss mule is accumulating resources over a long amount of time. So this would be like the first stage of equips. You get your CRA set, you get your Apso set, you get your regular bossing accessories. Maybe you have an event ring from an event. If you don't, that's okay. Maybe you got a KT, or maybe you did Meister to get a 4th event ring. Even if you don't have a 4th event ring, it's fine. But the whole point is you have 17-star Apso set, 17-star CRA. Your weapon, secondary, and emblem are all legendary, and they have 2 lines. So either 2 line of attack or a line of attack with a line of boss. Your emblem has either 2 line attack or a line of attack with line of IED. And all of your potentials are either unique or legendary. So they have like 1 line unique, maybe 2 line unique, maybe 1 line legendary, 2 line legendary, something like that. But anywhere between like 9 to 18% potentials. And your glove has a line of crit damage on it. So if you get to this point in terms of funding, you will be able to do all of your dailies. You'll be able to run H-Lomian. You'll be able to run H-Luel in a party and run C10E. This way you can start getting things to drop. You'll be able to start getting Twilight marks to drop, hopefully. You'll be able to start getting arcanes to drop, hopefully. You'll be able to start getting ring boxes to drop, hopefully. All these things. You're also able to do Helix every day by yourself, so you don't need a carry. You're able to do Pink Bean every day, Arcarium every day. You're able to do your Urda Request daily, so you can actually kill mobs in Cernium. Another thing that I should probably add is like, this is, ideally your level 260. So the funding process for C10E boss mules starts really once you're level 260, because then you could start doing all of these things. You'll have a lot of arcane force, and it'll just make it a lot easier for you. So this is like the first stage in terms of funding that I would do, because once you're at this point, you're able to just accumulate so many resources. If anybody's watching like my Lara solo bossing progression series, like mini series, you'll know that my Lara was at this level of funding for like 2 months. Like literally for like 2 months, I was just at this level of funding, but I just kept doing dailies every day. I kept, running every boss that I could every single week. My FP and my Night Lord were at this level of funding for a couple months as well, and I kept running whatever bosses I could, and eventually the spares started accumulating. So for example, on my Night Lord, I know my inventory is a mess, but this is like an example of what happens. Like you get a bunch of arcanes to drop eventually, you get a bunch of superiors to drop eventually, you get a bunch of dominator pendants, a bunch of Kana's treasures. Like if you just keep doing the dailies every single day, eventually you will accumulate a lot of stuff, and then you can utilize all the stuff to get to the next stage of equips. All right, so after step 1 is step 2. This is when you want to work towards with your step 1 gear. So after you have your step 1, you start accumulating resources, and this is what you want to work towards hitting for step 2. Now, this might seem like a big jump in power, right? You go from like 8 to 14 mil CP to like 50, 60, and it is a huge jump in power. But if you are doing things correctly, you've been saving mesos, you've been doing all of your dailies, and then an event hits, like a 5, 10, 15 hits, and a Shining Star 4 hits, and you have all of these resources to you, you have a lot of spares in the inventory, you saved a lot of money for it, then it's totally normal to go from doing these bosses in a party and like, barely doing that much damage to you're actually pretty strong now. And as a matter of fact, you actually are able to technically solo the bosses. And if you're somebody who's really patient, then you're pretty much done. But I don't think this is the final step. I think this is a really good step to hit. And then there's one more step after this that makes you like a proper, complete C10E boss mule, in my opinion. So the reason why step 2 is a little different is because there's a lot of options and a lot of variance in what could happen depending on what drops you get over the course of like maybe 2 to 3 months of doing dailies and running bosses week to week. So first of all, let's talk about Arcane Force. You either have max Arcane Force or you're really, really close to max Arcane Force at this point, which obviously gives you a lot of damage just from the raw stat and gives you a lot of bonus damage just because of the Arcane Force. So in terms of potentials, you want to try your best to legendary most of your gear that you are going to have forever, right? So for example, if you don't get any Dominator pendants in the process and you can't transfer to Superior pendant, you probably don't want to get it to legendary because eventually you will transfer over it and you'll lose your pot. But if you do happen to Star Force it, then that's okay. You could actually get it to legendary. Now, 3 usable lines of WSE, what this means is you don't want to have any junk lines on your weapon, secondary, and emblem. So what that looks like is, let's say your weapon is like boss attack. That's really good. You don't necessarily need 3 line attack. Like that's so expensive. You just need 3 usable lines. So like attack boss, attack, or like boss attack. Those are all good lines. Even something like attack damage is still like a pretty good line. Same with your secondary, some sort of combination of attack and boss. And then your emblem, you could have like 1 line attack, 1 line IED, 1 line attack, or like 1 line attack, 1 line IED, or even 1 line damage. Those are all like good combinations to have on your weapon secondary emblem because you're getting a lot of value from them and it's not super expensive. Now let's talk about star forcing. So you want to definitely 20 star your Golux. You could 21 star it as well if you have a lot of spares. I think it's worth 21 starring like the superior ring, for example, because if you go back to the start of the video, you should be able at this point to make a lot of Meister rings. You want to unlock Meister accessory crafting on your C10E boss mule. It's so much easier to be able to craft a bunch of Meister rings. Not only is it a good ring for you in terms of damage, it makes getting the superior ring high star really easy. So if you have a really strong main that has accumulated a lot of resources and you've been doing Threads of Fate, then it would be really easy to get Meister. I have Meister on like 6 or 7 characters just because my main has been able to accumulate so many resources over the time of playing it. So I think getting superior ring to 21 is good. Meister ring also to 21 is good. Kana's treasure, I put 17 to 21. The reason for that is because the drop rate is so RNG on these things. I do recommend getting a little bit of drop gear on C10E boss mules. Maybe you could just get like 1 line across the board. You don't really need meso gear. That way you could get like, 140 drop or something like that. It definitely helps when you're trying to accumulate resources. I think it's like really important to do that. Actually, I'm going to put that here. 120 to like 180% drop. So what that means is like you would use your previous rings from like your step 1, like these event rings, Treasure John, these like face eye accessories from like bosses. You would just get them to legendary and get 1 line drop on them. And if you do it across all your accessories, you'd have 180% drop. And then that way, whenever you're killing bosses or you're doing your dailies, you have a pretty high chance of actually getting something. That's actually pretty important to do, in my opinion. So yeah, so the variability in KT could be wide. So that's why I put 17 to 21. And then your 4th ring, there's a bunch of different options. You could either just stay with like like a silver blossom if you don't want to invest in something else. Maybe you got a slime ring along the way. Pretty hard to get these sometimes too. So if you got a bunch, then sure, definitely use the slime ring. I would always just raw tap slime ring. So it would be at least 17 stars. You could use an event ring, or maybe you got lucky and you have an Oz ring, like a Roar 3 or something like that. So your fourth ring is definitely like a flexible spot. Pendant, it would either be anywhere between, 17 to 21, depending on how many spares you have. Face and eye. Now, what's interesting about the face and eye is it depends on what kind of dailies you've been doing. So if you've been doing Commercy, then it would be really easy to get 21 star face and eye from Commercy. You don't even need to transpose, and the raw stats on them at 21 is actually really strong. But if you happen to get a bunch of Twilight marks, then I would recommend doing Twilight mark. If you really didn't do Commercy at all, you probably would have pink bean barks by now, and you definitely want to get it to 20. CRA, you would keep it at 21. Very easy to get this up. Now let's talk about the armors. So the armors you see, I have Abso and Arcane here. The reason why it's either or depends on what drops you've been getting. So if you've been doing the bosses week to week and you got the full Arcane set just from drops, the most important is the weapon. If you get a weapon that's a huge damage increase and you just keep it at 17, you never start past 17. But if you didn't, then that's fine. You just keep that Abso weapon at 17. But in terms of the armors, if you happen to get a bunch of armors from Arcanes, just keep them at 17 until you get more spares. But if you got no armors at all, this is what I actually did personally, is I would just get the Absos to 20 stars. I think it's worth just keeping them at 20. If you want an extra bonus in damage, you could get them to 21, which is not that much more expensive because you just fodder into the Abso using like Magnus Glove and Root Boo and Root Abyss Shoulder and Zakum Cape. You could just fodder into the Abso or the Ranmaru set. You could get either 21 or 20 star Abso, which is technically better than 17 Arcanes, and it'll help you leech the bosses easier if you want and then accumulate more Arcanes over time. But in the end, I think if you're a very experienced player, it's fine to stay on like 21 Abso the entire time and you don't switch to Arcanes. But I would say that because you're going to be running these bosses week to week to week to week, you're going to accumulate a bunch of Arcanes eventually anyways. So you'd want to switch to the Arcane set just because you have them regardless. So if you got a bunch of Arcanes, keep them at 17. If you didn't, just get 20 or 21 star Abso. And then that alone with the pots, right? You would get double crit damage on your gloves. This double crit damage, I put a star here because it depends on whether you're staying on Abso or not. If you see yourself staying on Abso, like you don't want to invest in Arcane Glove, then sure, do it. But if you're going to switch to Arcane Glove eventually, then just settle 1-line crit damage and then wait until you get an Arcane Glove and then 2-line crit damage it. But this alone, this configuration will definitely put you at least 50 to 60 mil CP. And to be honest, this is enough to solo C10. Like I've done HV Hilla solos at like 40 mil CP before, but obviously it takes the full timer. It takes like 29 minutes. I've done Lucid and Will at like 29 mil CP on my Night Lord, but it takes a really long time. So my Night Lord, for example, is 64 mil CP. My Fire Poison is like 56 mil, and they're able to do these bosses. It still takes a while though. So what's cool about this point is you could duo the C10 boss mules with somebody at this point as well really easily. Like you could kill the bosses within like 10 minutes if you duo them. Or if you still want to just join a party, then it'll make the party clear way easier than that. But it's up to you what you want to do at this point. Again, like I alluded to earlier, I don't think this is the full C10 boss mule in its like most complete state. There's another stage after this that would make it so that doing the C10 bosses would be a lot easier, and that's what you want to ultimately work towards. But this step 2 is a really, really good point to be at because you could still generate a lot of money week to week and get a ton of resources. Also, I don't think I talked about the second pendant slot. So second pendant slot, again, it depends on what drops you got. If you got a bunch of Dom pendants, you could just use that. If you got nothing and you've been doing commercial, you could use a Sweetwater pendant for the time being, or you could just stay on Mechanator pendant if you just don't want to do any of that. In terms of Hexa, you definitely want to at least have your masteries unlocked. So you have level 1 masteries. There's going to be more masteries that come out in the future that are going to make C10 boss mules even stronger because you could just get those to level 1 and it'll be huge for you. And then you have your origin. Now, getting all of this together is probably going to cost at least 100 bill mesos even on event, just getting to this point. Now, you could give or take a little. I think my Lara got to this point in like 70 something bill, but whereas my FP took over 100. So there is variance, but it definitely takes a lot of money and a lot of saving to get to this point, but it's still worth it to do so. And now I would say this is step 3. If you're at this point, I would say you're like a fully developed C10 boss mule and you should be able to kill all the C10 bosses in an hour or less. And you'll notice that not much has really changed that much since step 2, because step 3 is really just the small details being fixed a little bit more, and that's like the final point. And the big thing in step 3 is you're fully liberated now. The liberation weapon is like the biggest gain that you can make. You can fully liberate just with the step 2 gear. If you learn the bosses, this is enough damage to fully liberate, right? Like even clear black mage. But once you liberate, that's like the huge damage bonus. But just to go over everything in step 3, of course you want max arcane force, super important, so you have full damage on all of these bosses. You want to be at least level 260. The closer to 270 you are, the better, but you need at least level 260. In terms of the gear, you want either 21 or 22 star Golux. Now, the reason why you want either 21 or 22 is because stuff like the pendant would be really, really hard to 22 star, and you would need a lot of spares, a lot of Golux, all that stuff. So you could settle this at 21 or even 20, to be honest with you. CRA, you definitely want a 22 star it. CRA, you'll have unlimited copies at this point. It's relatively cheap to 22. Meistering, you should have a lot of copies as well from doing bosses over the course of months that you could craft. 22 star it. Kana's Treasure, you probably have gotten some as well, at least 21 star it. Slime Ring, probably you would have gotten a bunch of them by now, so at least get it to 17. I didn't go for 22 on it because you don't get too many of these where I could justify, say, like 22 you have unlimited copies. You could go for 21. The difference with 21 to 22, like the amount of copies you need, is a lot. Like settling 21 is like 2 boom average, where settling 22 is like 4 boom average, so it's like double the amount of spares you would need. You'd want at least a 21 star on the second pendant. You probably could get away with 17 star. Again, these are just recommended stats for that average player. If you're a very high level advanced player and you know how to do these bosses at low damage requirements, you don't need to fund this much. But I think for most players, if you fund this much, it'll just be a lot easier for you, and you'll probably end up doing it anyways just because you like getting gains, and getting gains on mules feels good because it's not as like risky as your main. The liberated weapon is the big one. Like I mentioned before, it gives you like at least 20% final damage on top of what you had. 20 to 21 star face / eye. So if you have black beam mark, it can only go up to 20, but if you've been doing commerce, you could get a 21 star monocle. If you've been doing a lot of commerce, you could even get it to 22. Same with the tattoo, but you probably got a bunch of twilight marks at this point as well, so at least try to 21 star it. And then arcanes or abso set. So by this point, if you've been doing the bosses week to week, you either have a bunch of arcanes already from the boxes dropping, or you will get them. And I recommend swapping to at least 19 star arcane set. The 19 star arcane set is about as good as 22 star abso, maybe a little bit better, so it's worth swapping to them at 19. If you have a lot of arcanes, you could even go for 21 on them. I know some people have C10 bosses that have 21 arcanes because they just got so many spares, but you don't necessarily need that. And again, technically you could just stay at 21 abso and it would be good enough, but I think the arcane boost is definitely worth investing in. Now for the pots, you want to at least 2-line legendary everything, so at least 21%. You'll probably find that in the process of potting your stuff, you might even hit some 3 lines, like 27% or 30%. Definitely want 2-line crit damage on your glove at this point. You definitely want 3-line usable WSE, so like either, you know, some combination of boss and attack on your weapon secondary, and then some combination of attack and IED on your emblem, or attack and damage on your emblem, like attack damage is still fine. And then flames. This is like the main thing that's also changing from before, is you 100% need the tier 6 attack flame on your weapon. Even step 2, you should have probably gotten this. And all of the other gear that can be flamed, you probably want like 20 to 30 flame score below endgame flames. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I have an entire video about flames, but long story short, you just want some sort of flat stat and some percentage. So for example, let's say on your hat, you get like 32 strength and 5% all stat, like that's good enough. You know what I mean? Even though technically it would be like 68 and 6 for like a really good CRA flame, you just want some sort of flat and some sort of percent combined, or a really high flat. Like if you roll like 130 flat or something on an arcane, like you would just keep that. Doing this would put you at around 80 to 90 mil CP, which is more than you need for C10 obviously, but it would make the runs a lot easier. Similar to Enlomian mules, some people are okay with doing Enlomian mules at like 2 to 3 mil CP. Even if it takes them a while, they're down because they want to make money. It's the exact same with C10 mules. Somebody like me, I'm doing the C10 bosses at around 50 to 60 mil CP. That way I didn't have to fund as much, and I'm okay with the longer runs, and I'm still able to make as much money. But I would say ultimately my C10 boss mules are going to look something like this, because I don't want to keep spending like 2 hours doing all of my bosses every week. I want them to be done in under an hour. Now, if you get to this point, you could probably even do the C10 bosses themselves, Vihila, Darknell, and Gloom, within one set of G skills, which is really, really good. Because if you could do that, then things will be way easier. Now, in terms of Hexa, you want to at least have Hexa like this, where your skills are level 1, because depending on what class you play, you might not need all level 1 skills. You have your origin level 1, and then some of your masteries leveled up as well. If you did decide to train past 260, then your Hexa would be even higher than this. If you got the Urda booster, it would be even higher. If you keep doing Urda requests, it would be even higher than this. So the more Hexa, the better, but you'd at least want level 1 on your Hexa skills, because that does make a really, really big difference. Now, all in all, getting to this point, you're going to be looking at least 100 billion mesos, at least. Even on event, you're probably going to spend at least 100 billion mesos across the podding and the starring and all this stuff. If you do it off event, it would cost almost double the amount. So that's why I keep reiterating, like, be patient, save your money, wait for events, all this stuff. The fastest way to do this is through hyperburn, right? Like, if you have a hyperburn and you have a bunch of materials already, then you could get this going real quick. You could do the entire process within just a few months, especially when the liberation process gets easier. But yeah, it takes at least a few months. Now, doing this would get you over 5 billion mesos a week just from funding your character to this point, which is a lot. So if you're spending at least 100 bill and you're making at least 5 bill, plus the MVPs you get, the MVPs have value. It has a lot of value, to be honest with you. You'll be able to pay back your character in at least 20 weeks, right? So 20 weeks for somebody who's this invested into the game isn't that long, to be honest with you. And like I said, you get a bunch of MVPs. So the training time you save on your main also has value, because people will like to say that, you know, bossing mules, there's no point, just go train your main. And that's a little bit true, because training your main is ultimately how you get stronger. But getting the MVPs from the mules helps your main a lot too. So I do think that has a lot of value and can't be understated. Also, far into the future, there's going to be the Legion Champion system that's coming out. If you want videos on Legion Champion, definitely let me know. I have a lot to say about it, a lot of guides that I could make about it too. Definitely let me know. And these C10 boss mules could turn into champions very easily. Anyways, with that all being said though, I appreciate you guys for watching. If you have any questions, definitely leave a comment below. Pull up to the Twitch stream so you can see me funding my mules to this point and many other characters and even beyond as well. If this video helped you out, definitely be sure to subscribe. It helps me out a ton here on YouTube and pulling up to my Twitch channel. With that all being said though, I appreciate you guys for watching. Have a wonderful day, and remember, be patient. Thank you so much to my members: Blazefire, Shooms, Shagad, Ravi Espa, Koga, Piconir, Skittles, Dante Victory, CK, J, Blunt Poppy Supreme Oil Backwards, Vampiric X, Fresh and Juicy, Assassin, and Migu. I appreciate you guys so much, and shout out to everyone who submitted fan art. If you always want to submit fan art, it's in the Discord linked below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.